completing the first of 4 exchanges in this deal between Hamas and Israel. Among the 24 hostages that were released by Hamas, 13 Israelis, 10 Thais, and 1 Filipino citizen. There was notably no U.S. hostages released as of today. I want to bring in our terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of Treasury, Jonathan Schanzer, and retired Army Colonel Jack Jacobs, an NBC military analyst. Jonathan, we'll start with you on this. Now, as we looked at the deal, you know, you've worked as a terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and you've played an integral role in the designation of numerous terrorist financiers. When you look at this deal and what's been part of it, I'm unaware of any major finance requirements, at least in this deal that we have details on at the moment. If you're aware of them, can you please tell us about them? If you're not, should have there been some?
Well, I think thankfully we've not seen any hostage, it's sort of a hostage diplomacy kind of a situation here where anyone's paying ransom. I think that is important. That's the last thing that I think Israel would want to do. It's the last thing the United States would want to do. Hamas is already getting quite a bit out of this deal, not just the release of some of the prisoners who are themselves guilty of violent crimes, but we are seeing a significant amount of fuel and other goods being transferred into the Gaza Strip. Of course, that will go to benefit the Gaza population, but we know that Hamas is going to divert a significant amount of that fuel to essentially help Hamas operate militarily. So the fuel is going to pump electricity and oxygen into the subterranean tunnels, those command tunnels, that will be used in the next phase of this war in the central Gaza Strip and the southern Gaza Strip. So I think Israel has essentially paid off Hamas through this, but not with cash, at least not that we're aware of.
Colonel, I want to move to something that we heard a little bit earlier. Netanyahu's ambassador, Mark Regev, spoke with our friend and colleague Chris Jansing a little bit earlier today in our coverage. I want to get your reaction on what was said on the other side of this. Take a listen.
Now the ball is in Hamas's court. This humanitarian pause can stop 4 days from now, and we'll be back to square one, and we'll be back at full-scale war. Or we can extend the humanitarian pause by the release of more hostages. I hope they release more hostages.
As we look at this, Colonel, whose court is it in right now? Because we got 2 today by both sides working together, plus Qatar, as well as Egypt. Do you agree with what Regev is saying, is that now it's all Hamas's court? It's up to them to make the move?
Well, they do have to agree to release more hostages. How many they release is a different story altogether, and it's not entirely clear how many hostages are still alive, nor where they are, nor who is holding them. So it's very difficult to say how long this is going to play out. But one thing to keep in mind is that the longer this pause lasts, the more it benefits Hamas. If you're on the defense, as Hamas has been, you want to keep the ceasefire as long as possible so that you can rearm, refuel, redistribute both ammunition and people, put your defensive positions in proper order for what will ultimately be a renewed attack. So this pause works to the great favor of Hamas. The longer they can string it out, the better off they are, Richard.
Colonel, who will be resupplying Hamas?
Well, there's an argument that says that whatever comes in to the southern border with Egypt, some of that, as Jonathan has said, is going to find its way to Hamas, and they'll take it themselves. They've done it before. There was at least one instance I can recall recently where a fuel truck that went in to support the Gazan people actually wound up in the hands of Hamas. We have to remember that Hamas is in total control of Gaza in any case. So anything that goes in there, that can easily be diverted for the use of Hamas, and one can expect that some of it, if not most of it, will wind up going into Hamas's hands, Richard.
Jonathan, I was mentioning earlier about the roles of both Qatar and Egypt, which you're very well aware of. What's in it for Qatar and Egypt to be helping in this deal?
Well, yeah, both of them have very different motivations. The Egyptians actually, I think, have been looking for relative calm, and they played an important role over the last several rounds between Israel and Hamas. I will say that the Egyptians, unfortunately, I think have not done a terrific job in terms of preventing some of these weapons from heading into the Gaza Strip. The Rafah crossing has been a major source of weapons resupply for Hamas, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to revisit at the end of all of this. But I think their intentions are good. They've been a good partner for the Israelis and for the United States over time. The same cannot be said, unfortunately, for the Qataris. The Qataris are both arsonist and firefighter. They're trying to take a victory lap here on the world stage for having secured the release of as many as 50 or perhaps even more of these hostages, plus the Thais, plus the Filipino today. But we cannot forget the fact that the Qataris have been sponsoring Hamas. They've been giving them $100 to $150 million a year. They have a Hamas office that is based in Doha. They have been running interference for Hamas from the beginning. And so, I think at some point we're going to have to see a revision of that contract that we have here in the United States with the Qataris. They've got some leverage with us. They've got the largest air base that we use in the Middle East. That's on the one side, but we provide them with a lot of security guarantees by keeping our military there. I think it's time for a serious discussion about what it is that they're getting out of their sponsorship of Hamas. And by the way, we should also add that this regime also supports the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. This really needs to stop, and I hope the U.S. government begins to address this.
Jonathan, I want to stay with you for a moment. The Colonel was telling us in our last segment that when he and I were talking, that Iran will be stepping up their moves going forward, if they haven't already, to a great degree for the next 3 or 4 days. And this is because of the multiple militias that may actually help to take down this deal. And they don't want this deal, is what the Colonel was saying last hour. What have you seen in terms of financial flows from Iran to various militias, not the binary that we're talking about of Hamas versus IDF? What have you seen?
Well, look, the Iranians have been the top financiers and top suppliers of weapons, top suppliers of training to all these groups that we see attacking both Israel and the United States across the Middle East. So the back of the envelope numbers that we see are $200 million a year to Hamas, plus the weapons and rockets and training, $800 million a year to groups like Hezbollah. That's actually, I think, the crown jewel as far as the non-state actor terrorist groups that Iran supports. Huge amounts of weaponry. In fact, they've also been providing Hezbollah with precision-guided munitions, or PGMs. These are incredibly lethal and precise weapons. We've not seen them used yet. The Israelis have been jamming GPS in northern Israel, but that could soon play a factor here in the resumption of the war. In addition, the Iranians have been providing significant support to the Houthis in Yemen. This is the group that was engaging in piracy on the Red Sea just a few days ago, and they've been firing long-range rockets at the Israelis out of Yemen. And then, of course, there are the Shiite militias that have been attacking the United States. More than 60 times different bases have been targeted in both Iraq and Syria. They get an unspecified amount of money, but nevertheless, we know that Iran, even when it's sanctioned, even when it's not sanctioned, doesn't matter. This is a regime that is the most prolific state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And right now they are cashing in on the investments that they've made with these various non-state terrorist actors.
Live pictures on the left-hand side for our viewers. Petah Tikva there in Israel. We've been following some of the video coming live out of that hospital. Earlier, what we were told was that is where many of the children were arriving that were formerly hostages. We expect shortly that we will get some sort of briefing at the Petah Tikva location there at the Children's Hospital. We'll be listening into that, but we just wanted to show you that this continues there at 11:30 p.m. local time there in Israel. And Colonel, as we get back to this idea of triangulation and more, and this idea that we are certainly not in a discussion of a binary one versus another, tell us about the divisions within Hamas and the way those may work against this deal as well.
Well, there are factions within Hamas, but they're also physically split up. They're not all in one location in Gaza, nor are they only in Gaza. And as we heard earlier, that there are lots of other factions that are that are both state and non-state supported, and certainly supported by Iran. The result is that the enemy here, and they're enemies of everyone, by the way, are fragmented. And if they're fragmented, they're extremely difficult to defeat. It means that a wide variety of pressures need to be brought on the international community from everybody who's concerned about this. And the mere statement that Netanyahu made, that he wants to destroy Hamas, while laudable in its goal, is going to be extremely difficult to do. Tried before. Israel was in Gaza before for a relatively long period of time and then left because it's difficult to administer and it's impossible to contain. The kinds of things that Jonathan was talking about, putting pressure on people who sound like they're our allies and assist from time to time, who have leverage over both those actors in the Middle East and on us, that needs to get started. The only way that there's going to be a solution to this problem is if the nation states in the region band together, become something of a coalition, and band together with the United States and the rest of the West to make sure that Hamas there's no resurgence of Hamas, and that the Palestinian people and Gaza are properly administered. Unless there can be an agreement among both Western countries and particularly the Arab nation states in the region to seriously take care of this problem and to participate in taking care of the Gazan people and making sure Hamas does not grow again, Hamas will continue to be a problem, and Iran will continue to use Hamas as leverage against the United States and its friends.
Jonathan, as we reflect on what the Colonel is saying here, one of the ways to address this, stop the money flows, as the Colonel was intimating here, and this is certainly what you know best. It was said in the reporting over the last 6 or 7 weeks, Hamas has been financed in many ways through cryptocurrency and other means. With Russia, it was the European Union and the United States looking at the transaction networks, right, where all the banks talk to each other as a way to stop money flows to assist in the war with Ukraine. What can be done now?
It's a great question. And, you know, we talked about Iran already in terms of being the primary sponsor, and we talked about the Qataris as being probably the next one just behind Iran. But there are other countries that we can lean on as well. I would point to Turkey as a significant sponsor of Hamas. This is another place where we have a Hamas headquarters, and they are plugged into the U.S.-led banking system. That's a huge problem that needs to be solved. Malaysia is another country that has been an HQ for Hamas over the years. We have some leverage there. We can hopefully unplug Hamas from the banking system in Malaysia. I look at Algeria and Kuwait as other countries that have been providing significant support to Hamas. There are, of course, additional ways that Hamas has been bringing in money, trade-based money laundering, and real estate portfolios, charities that operate potentially here in the United States as well as in Europe.
Charities.
Actually, charities. In fact, the Germans yesterday went in and raided a number of different spots, 13 or 14 different spots where they believe that Hamas was active, including, from at least from what I hear, at least 1 or 2 of those were charities. There may be a few here in the United States. We did a terrific job in the 2000s when I was working at the Treasury of picking apart Hamas's financial networks. We've lost the trail. We've lost the scent. And that's going to be a huge challenge, I think, for the U.S. to get back in the groove and to start to go after Hamas's finances here in the United States.
Yeah.
I doubt that it has been cleaned up entirely.
I have to ask you, why have we lost the scent, and how long have we lost the scent?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, we need to remember that the war on terror began to lose steam somewhere around 2009, 2010. We began to focus our efforts elsewhere. In fact, one of the things that I heard several years ago was that we were using Hamas, or people suspected of being involved with Hamas here in the United States. They had become protected sources in the fight against ISIS. And so we saw that in the early 2010s. After that, I think we began to shift our focus to places like Russia for good reason. We began to focus on China for good reason. But as I actually said last week in front of a congressional panel, we need to learn how to walk and chew gum here. The United States, I mean, we're a superpower. We should be able to combat China. We should be able to deal with Russia, and we should be able to engage in counterterrorism finance as it relates to Hamas, ISIS, and really any other terrorist group around the world. We should be able to do all of those things at once.
I lost interest in 09 and 10, right after, as you know so well, the Hezbollah-IDF war, which was in 07. Or in that area of 06, 07. So it's very quickly that things can change, and how fragile